Hi there, I am Dion Opperman. Welcome to where I unpack what it means to be a writer in the age of AI. If you have been following the impact of AI on the world, you most likely have heard someone explain that building an artificial intelligence machine involves the training of it on vast amounts of human-generated data and content scraped from the internet and other sources. Indeed, there have been many heated debates concerning the infringement of intellectual property rights. I'll touch on this in a moment. You also may have heard how these models are trained and have heard the word parameters being bandied about. Indeed, every time a new model is brought to market, the first thing that is declared is how many billions of parameters, or even trillions, the model contains. Parameters are simply variables. For instance, when writing a critical analysis of a book, you are analyzing the writing in terms of the writer's handling of parameters/variables such as structure, plot, and character, each of which can be broken down further into many parameters/variables. You can just imagine how many parameters are embedded in all of the content and data on the internet. You will also have learned that as the AI is trained on the mountains of human-generated data and content, it refines, through trial and error, the weight, that is, the importance it allocates to each of these parameters. When someone says, "Listen carefully, this is important," they are signaling that a larger weight must be allocated to the variable they are discussing, be it an economic indicator or a theme in a story or a condition in a contract. Identifying parameters consciously or unconsciously and allocating weights to them consciously or unconsciously is also how humans learn. For instance, we learn that the parameter faithfulness is an important parameter in the relationship with your spouse. And we learn through comments made by our parents and others, and also seeing the consequences of unfaithfulness for the unfaithful, that this parameter is important. That is, it is heavily weighted by society. And so we give it a heavy weighting in our own internal model. The collective pool of the millions of parameters we accumulate and the weight assigned to each drive the choices we make, be they the next word in a sentence, or what to have for supper, or whom to marry, or which car to rent from which rental company. Marketing specialists have figured out how to exploit our conscious or unconscious parameters and weights. A conjoint analysis, for instance, is a powerful market research tool. A conjoint analysis surfaces the underlying utilities, i.e. the weights, that a person allocates to a set of variables when making decisions or choices. For instance, when renting a car, some people will allocate more weight to the variable excess payment you have to make in case of damage to a vehicle, whereas other people might allocate more weight to the variable type of car or to the variable rental fee per day. Knowing your utility preferences, i.e. the weights you assign to these variables, and then aggregating these weights across a large sample of respondents, market researchers can tell a car rental company which variables are most heavily weighted by the largest section of people and should therefore be focused on in the rental company's offerings and advertising to trigger the consumer's utility bias. Good, eh? Parameters and weights are not static. As we go through life, we constantly add, consciously or unconsciously, parameters to our knowledge base, and consciously or unconsciously assign weights to each of them and update those weights with further learning and experience. When an AI is trained on content produced by humans, it is at bottom being trained on the weights that billions of humans have allocated to billions of both conscious and unconscious parameters. In a sense, an AI performs a massive conjoint analysis on the collective content of all of humanity to surface billions of parameters embedded in that content and to allocate weights to each of them. A quick aside here, if I may, about IP, intellectual property. The IP of content you have produced is the collection of the variables and weights embedded in the content you generate, because it is those parameters and their weights that determine the way in which that content is expressed and shaped. We all have access to the same words and ideas, just as composers all have access to the same notes. It is your parameters and their weights that determines what story you tell and how you tell it. When you write a book and assert your IP over it, you are actually asserting your ownership of the collection of parameters and their weights that drove the generation of its form and content. And it is those very parameters and weights, your weights, on which an AI is trained. Hence the big question: is training an AI on human-generated content an infringement of IP? Well, like an AI, humans are also trained on other people's parameters and weights. Some of it paid for and some of it not paid for. Some learning you pay for, some you get for free. Think of all the learning you have done for free on YouTube. When you buy a book, you have paid for the IP. When you borrow it, you have not. When you talk to another human and they share their thoughts with you, you are being exposed to their parameters and weights and may well adjust your own parameters and weights as a consequence. But you have not paid. Nor do you acknowledge every single person you have spoken to and every single conversation you have had, and mostly forgotten, when you generate content. You may have forgotten the conversation, but it sits in the unconscious and influences your parameters and the weights you consciously or unconsciously assign to them. When it comes to training LLMs, large language models, the question of IP is not as simplistic as it is IP theft. Of course, if content that is behind a paywall and not freely available to humans is used to train an AI, then I would argue that that is IP theft. If, however, the content is in the public domain and therefore freely available to anyone that wishes to consume it, then it is not IP theft. If a human can access it for free, then why not an AI? But that's just what I think. I'm not an IP expert. Back to the main focus of this episode. Trained as they are on vast amounts of human-generated content on every subject contemplated by humans since time immemorial, collaborating with an AI is like tapping into what Carl Jung described as the collective unconscious of humanity. To those writers that reject collaboration with AI, my question is, if some other metaphysical being were to appear before you and offer you access to the collective unconscious and the collective consciousness of humanity, would you decline the offer? Many artists speak of moments during content generation when they experience the flow, a state of mind that hovers between the conscious and unconscious, when everything flows and the best and most productive work is accomplished. In such a state, many cultures believe that you are connected to the collective unconscious and consciousness, to what Vedic philosophy referred to as cosmic consciousness, W.B. Yeats as the spiritus mundi, the spirit of the world, and the ancient Hindu, Egyptian, and Greek traditions as the cosmic archives. When I brainstorm with an LLM like Claude, I find myself entering a flow state very quickly as ideas pour forth between us, time disappears, and extremely productive work is done. So what are the implications for writers of this kind of access to and collaboration with an entity that is the product of the collective thinking and the parameters and weights embedded in that thinking of a vast proportion of, if not all, of humanity? First, the ability to algorithmically access humanity's shared storytelling patterns through AI presents an extraordinary opportunity for creative insight. When we collaborate with AI, we're essentially interfacing with a computational model of humanity's entire storytelling heritage, every myth, archetype, and narrative structure that has resonated across cultures and time. Second, if writers can access and engage with humanity's collective output through AI, perhaps we're moving from a model of writing centered, up until now, around the notion of the individual writing in isolation, towards one in which a writer's output reflects the unique product of the creative interaction between that individual writer and the constantly evolving collective conscious and unconsciousness of humanity embedded in the AI. And finally, there is the paradox that AI, despite being artificial, in the connection it offers to the collective consciousness and unconscious of humanity, may help us connect more deeply with our own individual humanity and with what it means to be human. You're not talking to an individual member of humanity. You are talking to an intelligence that speaks with a collective mind of the whole of humanity, reflecting our own humanity back at you. Rather than creating distance from human experience, AI may actually help us see our shared humanity more clearly, much like a telescope, though artificial, brings us closer to the stars. Thank you for sharing this journey with me.